All right, we're back with more NFL coverage, and in this one, there are a lot of different developments to address in terms of overall free agency, a few draft things, as well as some developments in regards to construction, even, of new stadiums. But even with all that in mind, and even with some news recently coming in, nothing even remotely compares, and nothing is more of a priority to me right now and what I do on this shit than what the hell happened on Monday. You see, I got the jersey on. You already know where I'm going. Per Adam Schefter on Monday, he comes in and states that Jaxon Smith-Njigba got himself fucking paid with a 4-year, $168.6 million contract extension and over $120 million guaranteed, making him, as of the recording of this video, the richest wide receiver in NFL history in regards to per year salary at over $42.15 million. Now, I'm not going to go all crazy in terms of trying to do some wild, out-of-pocket fanboying shit. My week is made. As soon as I heard the news, as soon as I got the notification come through my phone, my week was made. It was already immaculate. Because it just culminated and was the perfect outcome to everything that I had been talking about. Every single thing. Go back, watch what I was saying last season, off season, when DK Metcalf got traded. And when Tyler Lockett decided to end his tenure with the Seahawks. I told you Jaxon Smith-Njigba was in for a big year. I told you then. And what the hell has proceeded to happen over the last year and some change? He lit it up last season, being the focal point of that offense and setting multiple Seahawks franchise records to where you could argue that for a wide receiver individually, it might have been one of the stronger seasons in Seahawks history, point blank period. Left and right, week by week, with consistency in terms of getting over at least 90 plus yards, sometimes 100 yards a game, and around 6 to 8 catches a game. It was week in, week out, consistent production that could not be matched by most other players in the NFL. And it got to a point where ultimately, with how much the Seahawks were willing to move him all over the field and get the absolute most they could out of him when they did decide to throw the football, it made for something truly special to watch. You saw it unfold game after game. Go look at the Monday night game that occurred at the exact same time. The Mariners lost the fucking ALCS, unfortunately. Go watch that game against the Texans and see the man continue to dunk on pretty much every defender. He cooked up Derek Stingley Jr. in that game. Yet everybody wants to continue to have the conversation that just because Christian Gonzalez did do a pretty great job in the Super Bowl game, that game invalidated him being eligible for any kind of contract like this. And sure, Jaxon Smith-Njigba is a wide receiver that, again, isn't always going to be facing off against the best corner at the best time when the team is trying to put him in motion and utilize him all over the field to create those mismatches in unique situations and positions on the field. But at the same time, he's shown you throughout the season that when he did go against high-level cornerbacks, he could beat them and beat them consistently. Yet one game all of a sudden can just change the narrative completely and make other people have amnesia like they didn't watch this man do what he did last season. And it is a rise that I was grateful to look at and definitely appreciate it from my perspective being a person who literally exploded into absolute bliss once he was selected in 2023 with the 20th overall pick. I was ecstatic then. And you watched that video as well. I was hyped as shit for him to join this team, knowing what he did at Ohio State. Knowing it. And it's all coming to fruition as we speak. Now, it wasn't always looking that way. I understand that. Because, one, you have the deep personnel at wide receiver. It was a good problem to have for the Seahawks in 2023 and 2024, having all of DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jaxon Smith-Njigba being added to the mix made for one of the deeper receiver cores in the entire NFL. And at that point, when you have that many mouths to feed, you're going to have to look at somebody as being the primary option out of everybody else, and you're going to want to do everything that you can to put them in the best position to succeed. Now, in his rookie season, it wasn't going to work out that way, and it proved not to. Mainly because when you look at that, Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf were still established wide receivers in their own respects as the solidified number 1 and number 2 guys. Fair enough. There is also another part of this conversation that has to deal with the fact that Shane Waldron is a football terrorist. A football terrorist. That is why he doesn't have a job with the team anymore. That's why he was fired after 2023. That is why Jaxon Smith-Njigba in the offseason in 2024 literally hesitated and could not even come to words with a proper answer in regards to his feelings about him when he was at the fucking event with the fucking bounty shit behind him. That awkward moment resulted from the things that Shane Waldron was doing. Go search up anything about Shane Waldron. Hell, there'd been an image circulating around showing Jaxon Smith-Njigba's route tree from that season. It was fucking horrible. It was bad. Hitch route after RPO play again and again and again. And he tried to do as best as he could to make the most out of those receptions. But they were barely extending beyond 5 yards past the line of scrimmage. That's what Shane Waldron was doing. So when he comes out with 628 receiving yards and 63 receptions in the first season, it does look a little underwhelming, especially when you consider where he was drafted. But this is also a man in Shane Waldron who clearly didn't know what the fuck he was doing. So you bring in a different system. Ryan Grubb last year. And, 2024 I should say. He was somewhat okay. He still was trying to make the transition from college and he didn't get everything figured out. But then you started to see a bit more intent, a bit more, urgency in some respects to try to work the ball over to Jaxon Smith-Njigba and involve him more in the offensive flow of the game. And he got his first 1,000-yard season, paired up alongside DK Metcalf. He got his first 100 reception season. So there was a clear jump from year 1 to year 2. But what did that end up doing? As great as it was for Jaxon Smith-Njigba, it left a guy like Tyler Lockett in a weird spot. Now, to that point, he'd been a much older, much smaller player as it was. So, naturally, when he does get these receptions, you're not going to get many yards after the catch with a player like Tyler Lockett because he's going to do the best he can to conserve his body. And to be fair, it has worked for him. You have not heard anything about Tyler Lockett suffering any sort of wild injury or anything like that because he protects his head. He makes it hit a point to do that consistently. So a lot of the receptions in 2024 for him were fairly short. And while he could take the top off of the defense occasionally, his role kind of regressed into more of a slot guy. And he was relegated to some of the same things that Jaxon Smith-Njigba was going through in his rookie season. Plus, he was rendered a little less effective. And again, that's the idea of him just getting older. It's not anything that he necessarily did wrong as a player, because he's obviously a great player and a greater individual to have if you had him in a locker room. But the Seahawks had to, and he, I guess, in that sense as well, seeing all of this go down, decisions had to be made in what is regarded as a business, even if they had the loyalty to DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. And it would have been great to see them still be a part of this team. But clearly, the ceiling with them at this position was a little capped. Also apparent in the fact that, okay, the Seahawks had a different quarterback situation with Geno Smith being there, and you, at this point, hadn't really contended for a serious playoff spot, and were just meddling for seasons on end, I should say. Now, again, you haven't necessarily been terrible, but you want to try to take that next step, especially with some of the defensive pieces that you have. You want to take that next step into contention. And, man, ultimately they decide to trade DK Metcalf, and they let go of Tyler Lockett. It was crushing. But the vision clearly was understood. Jaxon Smith-Njigba now has the reps to say that, hey, he has the true experience of being regarded as a premier player in an offensive system. And Klint Kubiak, although he's no longer the offensive coordinator with the Seahawks, he also deserves a massive amount of credit. It's something that the Seahawks will try to replicate with their next man. And Jaxon Smith-Njigba is going to continue performing at a high level. But I think the way that Kubiak was able to see the talent that Jaxon Smith-Njigba had and understand that, okay, this is a guy who, even if he's never had the number one reps in this offense before, he is something special. So I'm going to build my entire game plan around establishing the run. And to the point that when we do establish it, we open up the pass game and open it up so well to where we put as much faith and trust as possible in number 11 on the outside, or in a different position in the slot, or as the number 2 outside guy on the other end of the field, in motion, in the backfield with the Debo package. Kubiak got as creative as he possibly could. And you blend his skill set as an offensive coordinator, because it truly unlocked in Seattle for him. He'd been doing well with New Orleans, but obviously talent and his own ability really were on massive display in Seattle last season. Consider the fact that, as I've heard from so many other places in such a long period of time, the Seahawks had that go down, and Jaxon Smith-Njigba did this, even though he had 163 receptions and 163 targets and 119 receptions on the year. The Seahawks still threw the ball the least compared to any of the receivers who ended up in the top 5 for receiving yards and receptions pretty much throughout the entire season. And the Seahawks, again, to continue driving that point home, there were cases where they were literally blowing teams out, and Jaxon Smith-Njigba was being taken out at halftime after 3 quarters as well. So who knows what the numbers could have looked like in those situations. And again, you didn't need to do it because the Seahawks were just that dominant on both sides of the ball. It was truly spectacular stuff on their end. rivaling the overall legacies of guys like Isaac Bruce, like Steve Largent. Again, breaking some of their own records and kind of matching some of the same milestones that those guys had in particular spans, including with what he was able to do in the NFC Championship game. Because everybody wants to take out the context. Yeah, he might not have done too much in the 49ers game or the Pats game. They blew those teams out. They blew them out. Why would Jaxon Smith-Njigba need to go as crazy as possible when they already had a 17-0 lead in the first quarter, when they were already forcing the 49ers to be backed into such a debilitating corner? What would that need to happen for? Why would they need to utilize Jaxon Smith-Njigba that much in the Super Bowl when they suffocated that Patriots offense? And then, hey, what happened in the NFC Championship game? A game that people already will continue to state was the real Super Bowl so much. Well, he rose to the fucking occasion. Had 10 receptions for 153 yards and a touchdown. So he did his job in a closely contested contest against a team that the Seahawks had been struggling to beat for years. And against a team that Sam Darnold had been struggling to beat for years. So that answered all the questions right then and right there. What are we doing? Are we serious right now? And it's only getting started. It is only getting started. We have to keep in mind that the money guaranteed in this situation matters a lot more. Yes, when you factor in all the bonuses and potential incentives and things like that, that's going to hike the price up to $42.15 million per year. But the $120 million guaranteed is the focus here. That is the primary focus. The initial reports about it were saying, and I'm like, again, he kind of alluded to it, I guess. My thing was that they were just misconstruing this completely. Like, you're phrasing it like he's just going to throw a complete and total tantrum if he doesn't get himself a high-paying deal or a deal that makes him one of the higher-paid wide receivers in the league. And I'm looking at that on repeat as we build up throughout this free agency period. I'm like, what the fuck are we talking about? But then we get some other reports from Schefter leading up to this, essentially stating that both of the fifth-year options for both Jaxon Smith-Njigba and Devin Witherspoon were exercised last week before we even get to this. So that opened up the floodgates right then and right there. Because that's the flexibility you are offered as a franchise with the first-round picks that you get specifically. You got two great ones in that 2023 draft. So you're thinking that, hey, if we open up the room to make it happen now, there's a good opportunity for us, even with what we've lost, to go ahead and ink these studs to long-term deals. And Jaxon Smith-Njigba is one down. To get into the full details of this contract, I'll cite this source from Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk in an article that just lists what exactly it looks like in full. The verbiage can get a little boring, but it's essential so that people understand instead of just jumping to conclusions. All right, so, quote, here are the full details of the Smith-Njigba contract per a source with knowledge of the terms. Signing bonus, $35 million. 2026 base salary, $1.25 million. 2026 workout bonus, $250,000. Fully guaranteed but must be earned. 2027 option bonus, $30 million. 2027 base salary, $1.53 million. Both fully guaranteed. 2027 workout bonus, $250,000. Fully guaranteed but must be earned. Per game roster bonus in 2027, $850,000. Fully guaranteed but must be earned. 2028 base salary, $18.837 million. Guaranteed for injury at signing and fully guaranteed on the 5th day of the 2028 waiver period. $250,000 and same requirements for the workout bonus that year. And $850,000 total in the per game roster bonus. Same requirements there. 2029 option bonus, $10 million. 2029 base salary, $19.9 million. 2029 workout bonus, $250,000. And 2029 per game roster bonus, $850,000 total, all with the same criteria applying on a year-to-year basis. 2030 base salary, $32.2 million. 2030 workout bonus, $250,000. 2030 per game roster bonus, $850,000. 2031 off-season roster bonus, $3 million, due on the 5th day of the 2031 league year. 2031 base salary, $37.7 million. 2031 workout bonus, $250,000. 2031 per game roster bonus, $850,000 total. With a total payout over 6 years of $195.167996 million, end quote. So yes, the contract is there. It is large. It is big. But you can't get so caught up at the same time in looking at just a number and taking out everything else that comes with it. Because with this in mind, he's still on the contract, and the extension itself will kick in a few years down the line. It is just tacked on to the other 2 years that he's serving this out. You pick that up already, you exercise it, and you give yourself that room to not have to worry about this before it's potentially too late. When you look at that overall payout, that ain't half bad. Because with a deal like that, in a market for wide receivers that is consistently fluctuating, this is yet another offseason where the cap has now increased for the position. And it's going to put a lot of other teams in potentially dire situations to try to match it, maybe even go over it. Now, I was reading into it a little bit more to try to get a sense of, okay, the deal's done. And again, I'm ecstatic about it. But what does this do for other teams? What does this do for other players? Because as I've been watching some stuff on it, you've had different guys like Adam Schefter say, okay, in terms of overall non-quarterbacks, you could have guys like Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson also looking for contracts that'll be very, very large, especially for them being running backs. And those are probably well-deserved. But when you see something break in the market like that, you want to try to ensure that you are putting yourself in a good position to at least game the market enough and be in good standing to continue working on other deals with other players and making sure your team is still working with enough to get what you need to get done. If you're trying to contend, if you're trying to rebuild, whatever the case may be. You're trying to make sure you have enough room to see that executed properly. And it's all about the projection game. They believe in their heart of hearts that Jaxon Smith-Njigba is going to continue performing at a high level for years to come. Because he started out putting together a somewhat solid season in year one after setting records in 2021 and then missing most of 2022. It was a fair risk when they drafted him, but it's paid off, and he's proven to them that I am a bona fide superstar caliber player. So rather than create this whole fucking game and dance around the obvious, they paid him. They got the deal done and got right down to business. They didn't play all these different games. They didn't play all of this delaying shit in these back and forth games with a fucking agent. They just sat down with John Schneider being the mastermind and the wizard of a general manager that he is, and he got it the fuck done without hesitation. Even if Jaxon Smith-Njigba was truly taking those comments in stride, everybody's overreacting. Everybody's making it out to be like, oh, they're going to lose them. Done deal. It's not always going to be a linear path to performance in the NFL. But you are, whenever you have these long-term deals come in, you are keeping it in your mind that, okay, we have a franchise talent here. We can either get this done now and continue to weave in our own flexibility in the matter to still have a relative amount of control while the player gets what he wants. Or we can give the player all the leverage to do whatever he wants moving forward if we continue to delay it and delay it and delay it and delay it. I personally attributed a lot to a similar situation, not that they are the same player, but what was the context and what was the conversation when Patrick Mahomes got the half of $1 billion deal in 2020, or near half of $500 million. Wait, no, I'm jumbling my word. Look, he got the $450 million deal across 10 seasons in 2020. And niggas lost their minds. They lost their fucking minds. To see a contract in NFL terms look like a fucking baseball deal. They couldn't conceive. They couldn't fathom that something like that went down. Meanwhile, the Chiefs are like, okay, yes, he's had some question marks, especially with mechanics coming out of Texas Tech as a quarterback. But when he has been the starter for us over the past 2 seasons, he's taken us to such new heights as an organization. And there is a chance for us to keep this momentum moving forward for years to come. So we need to seize this opportunity now and do something. And they did. And what have the Chiefs proceeded to do now? Not to say and not to assume that, okay, the Seahawks can just continue to win and win and win and win. That would be great. But they got ahead of the curve. And for years, at least for this half decade up to the point where Mahomes recently had to restructure his contract, they didn't have to worry about giving him a completely new deal and have to live with the idea of not capitalizing on that opportunity early. They got it done. They cleared it out. They were able to get themselves some solid players through free agency in that time. And they were able, within this 5-season stretch, to draft relatively well. And they kept winning. And now Mahomes is literally on fucking Hall of Fame track, being compared to the likes of Tom Brady. So again, that projection could look a little different for the Seahawks and for a guy like Jaxon Smith-Njigba. And the whole idea is that you truly don't know what's going to happen. But you are taking into account what you have now. You are taking into account what you see at the moment. And you are thinking up different scenarios that could be posed in the future. And you're trying to see what exactly your best move is. It's a very big decision to make. It's a large amount of money. But it's a damn deal. And it's a smart time to make it happen. Like I said, Devin Witherspoon is probably going to be looking for a contract too. The fellow said himself. And I can expand on him even further when that does happen. Hit me back when it does, I suppose. I don't know if the Seahawks would be willing to give him another record-setting, market resetting deal at the cornerback position in the same offseason. I don't know if they would go for that, but if they do go with that decision, wouldn't be rash. Devin Witherspoon's a fucking baller and one of the best corners in the NFL. So again, you could make this a problem later, or you could eat the surface level idea, conception of that now, and continue to have these players perform well on contracts that are still in time, going to be flexible for your team. And that's what the hell the Seahawks are doing. They're playing for the long term here. They're playing for the long term and doing so in players that they trust can continue this moving forward. In terms of other teams being put in pressure, the main opponent, rather, in this entire thing has been Puka Nacua. I had to read into it a little more, but frankly, it's understandable. We can have our own debates about who exactly is the better wide receiver. They're both fucking great. Puka Nacua was a 5th rounder. Being able to emerge from that as a diamond in the rough and do what he's been able to do for the Rams in his first 3 seasons as a player is something you're rarely going to see from anybody drafted that late. And he is well on par to be regarded as one of the best wide receivers in the NFL himself. The Rams are in an interesting position because you just had the MVP, first-time MVP, in Stafford last season. And quite frankly, I don't know if they have a contingency plan in terms of going out and getting a quarterback right now to potentially take over. They also aren't sure if Stafford is going to really keep things long-term. Now, he said, as he accepted the award, that he is going to return for the 2026 season, but you're just playing everything by ear. You can't risk signing a player who is as old as Matthew Stafford is to a long-term deal as it is, but even then, aside from, playing it that way, you can't risk giving him a maybe 2-year deal with, a certain amount of money and just have him potentially get hurt and miss all this time and not fill out the full value of that contract. So there's a lot of risk going on there as well. And of course, you have Davante Adams working alongside Puka Nacua in this entire thing as well. In their mind, I may not be able to agree with them, but in their mind, they have the best wide receiver in the NFL. In his mind, he'll probably think that he is the best wide receiver in the NFL. And that could be a fair way to look at it for them from their perspective. But in terms of the fact that this just exploded, in terms of the fact that Alec Pierce also got the richest free agent wide receiver contract in NFL history, it would be remiss to think that they are not taking all of this into stock. They have to. They don't have a choice. And their decision will have to be made sooner. With Puka Nacua being a 5th round pick, he does not have the flexibility that would be afforded to that of a 1st round pick solely. Any idea of any potential 5th year option for him doesn't exist. That's what happens when you are drafted that late. The value and some of the benefits that come with each and every pick diminish. And by the time you get to the 5th round, a 5th year option is completely off the table. This is going to be Puka Nacua's 4th season coming up. And they are going to have to figure this out very soon. You can either pay him now and risk potentially paying even more, knowing that you have a quarterback who's damn good, but also potentially on the outs in a few short years. And understanding that, there have been projections okay, they could damn near give him $50 million a year. And it's there's no worth in doing that for a wide receiver. Well, he's produced at a high level. And he's far exceeded his draft value. You feel like in that situation for him, any kind of money that you ask for, you should get. But the front office will have to see if they can align with that. Or if they just decide to delay this, it makes for negotiations that can honestly go one way or the other. So we will have to continue to monitor that, and that's going to be key. Now, this CBS Sports article that I read on it highlighted 2 other names that could be relevant to this conversation somehow, some way. And the first is George Pickens. I read through it. Need I say more? Because frankly, with the way in which I've had to attack the entire George Pickens situation with the Cowboys and what they haven't been doing this offseason already in prior videos, you may leave yourself no choice. Because even if Pickens warrants the kind of money that makes him closer to being one of the higher paid wide receivers in the NFL, you are still in a spot where if he gets a contract like that, you're paying him more than CeeDee Lamb after you just restructured his deal, which makes no sense whatsoever. You've got to be doing something because you're not making any moves. And you have all this money cleared up right now. So, again, I don't know what direction it is that the Cowboys are taking. You know, the article says that it's not out of the realm of possibility. But it would be yet another situation for the Cowboys where a delay cost them everything. It did so with Lamb to the point where they had to renege on it and restructure the contract in the first place. It did so to the point where you signed Dak Prescott to a $60 million per year deal the day before the season opener. The very day before the season opener 2024. And you already regret that to the point after he got injured for parts of that season that you had to restructure it this year. So you're just going to make the same mistake with Pickens, or you're going to risk losing him because Jerry Jones still doesn't want to talk to his fucking agent. It's like, what are we actually doing? And then another interesting name they highlighted here is Drake London. Similar context here. With him being a first-round pick, they picked up his fifth-year option. So they still have a chance to potentially make some noise here. There were rumbles about the start to a contract negotiation process for him last offseason. They fell through. They couldn't come to a long-term solution just yet. So this year is going to be for it all, essentially. Because for as good as Drake London has been, and probably a little bit underrated as a wide receiver prospect, they can use the argument that he just got injured last year. And, we don't want to invest in somebody who's going to be injury prone. Well, Drake London's been mostly durable for the start of his career. So that's just a little weak to say, but the Falcons front office, especially with this new regime, can really look at it that way, right? And so if you're Drake London in this position, you're going to want to do everything in your power to make them understand that you should be paid, and paid handsomely, to a point that makes you at least a top 15 wide receiver in terms of average salary. I would think so. He's clearly been a hit for them as a player. The struggle with them kind of comes into the same aspect that the Seahawks may have to deal with in terms of extending Devin Witherspoon as well, potentially to a long-term deal that could make him the richest corner in NFL history, if they do choose that direction. Now again, London is probably not going to be a player that'll get the richest money, but his worth is going to increase as a result of the deal. So if the Falcons, if you are the Falcons, you have to toggle that. But also, as I mentioned, Bijan Robinson has been a name that's been thrown out there for a potential increase, a monumental increase in pay, in average salary for him. And he'd be well worth it as one of the best and most versatile running backs in the NFL right now. I keep telling you Falcons and Lions fans, the trade that sent Bijan Robinson essentially traded his draft rights to Atlanta and had Gibbs' draft rights swapped over to the Lions at that point. It was a win-win. It was a win-win. You more than handled that. Okay, so you're good. Now it creates a bit of a situation for the Falcons where they're going to have to decide. If you're going to pay an exorbitant amount of money to one, you might want to handle the other deal with a little more tactfulness in this situation. You don't want to just be outwardly spraying money all over the place like you have as much cap space as possible, because they are still somewhat restricted themselves. And pretty much every team is, even with the increase to $300+ million. You just have to manage your money appropriately in this situation. But man, hey, these are the woes and the burdens that these teams have when you wait and you try to prolong the process. John Schneider understands what he is doing. Why question it? Why question it at all? I'm just excited as shit, man. Truly. Now into some other developments to kind of work backwards a little bit. The Saints, ironically enough, signed away Ty Chandler. I end off the last free agency video talking about how, okay, the Vikings still have him on their roster. No, the fuck they don't. So now the Vikings are going to be looking for some sort of a solution there and a true solution there. It's a weaker running back class, but there are some guys that they could pick up late round. Maybe like a Mike Washington Jr. from Arkansas who ran the fastest 40 time. Maybe they could go ahead and snag him in a later round. Just to have somebody back there that makes some sense. Because they're left with pretty much no one right now. And I don't think, I won't say no one, right? But to turn Jordan Mason into your running back one, considering how he traditionally does not feel that kind of responsibility, and also with the fact that in back-to-back seasons, he has suffered some devastating injuries that have truly cost him the ability to do everything you'd expect of him. That's not a person you want to rely upon as the sole running back in a system. As for the Saints, they're probably still looking for another outlet as well. I just find this move really weird for them. I don't like Ty Chandler's your guy. You just get Travis Etienne Jr. as he wants you to pronounce his name with it having Creole and, French patois style heritage. So, we got to be fair there. But you're already set there with him and Alvin Kamara, seemingly. Why Ty Chandler? I don't know. I find that very strange. The Colts signed Carson Towt, who is a basketball player, a former Notre Dame forward, and they're trying to convert him to a tight end. Tell me where you've heard that story before. Why is this happening with the Colts 2 times in the last decade? And you also have Tyler Warren. They are really just trying to beef up their tight end position, I guess. I don't know. That's an interesting way to frame this. I don't understand. The Titans signed Austin Deculus. Chargers fans understand. Chargers fans understand completely. This man, yes, he's more of a rotational piece. You're not expecting him to be a starter. Because, boy, when he got those starts for Los Angeles last season, the shit was rough. And you out there and you see how he and a few of these other backup linemen were all assorted on the same line throughout the regular season and in the brief postseason run that they had. You could tell why Justin Herbert was under so much duress and why he had to lead the league in scramble yards. You can tell. So all I'm saying for the Titans is don't rely on that shit. Please don't. Because the last thing you need is a guy in Cam Ward who was considered to be the safest pick last draft to start to have to run for his life too. You don't need it. And that's also on some of their other guys, like J.C. Latham, like Peter Skoronski, actually stepping it up as prospects. Both of them were considered to be very great offensive linemen entering their respective drafts. They're still young players. They deserve a little bit of slack and leeway, but they ain't just as much as everybody else on that team. As young as they are, they've got to start progressing at some point. You cannot keep settling for these linear moves. That shit is not going to move any kind of needle whatsoever. It just gives you an extra body. Those guys have got to take the next step forward. Former center for the Browns, J.C. Tretter, speaking of offensive linemen, would be hired as a new NFLPA executive director earlier in the week. For context, obviously, the entire leadership of the NFLPA came under fire last year with just some complete and total infidelity, you want to call it, just a lack of integrity on the part of the former executive director that was there. And he had to step down and resign. He was still placed under fire for all of that stuff. And I think some of these things are still actively going on now. But again, if you're the NFLPA in that situation, you're trying to, at the very least, get yourself in a positive light again. And there wouldn't be any harm in taking on a former player and also having Jalen Reeves-Maybin back as, I guess, a voice for the entire thing, the president of it himself. Okay, you will not have an issue with J.C. Tretter, a former player himself, who understands what they would need and who understands what they are going through to take over that role. There is no harm, no foul with that whatsoever. This is a safe move, and one of the safest moves they could have made for their own reputation, because, boy, they needed it. Absolutely. The Lions would sign DJ Wonnum to a one-year deal worth up to $6 million. The Vikings would sign Johnny Hekker, and the 49ers would sign Corliss Waitman. Boston Scott, the former Eagles running back, would officially retire from the NFL. You know, it's crazy to consider. It's another week, another video, and another retirement involving a player that primarily was a special teamer. That is where Boston Scott made his mark mainly with the Eagles as more of a fan favorite caliber of player. Especially in the return game. Now, unfortunately for him, he did not get credited with any award for his contribution there. But, of course, with his Eagles tenure, he amassed 1,295 yards on the ground and 16 total touchdowns there, along with a touchdown out of the backfield in 2020 as well. Now, he is another player who hadn't been in the league for a good few years, especially after 2023. And I think a number of things can be attributed, to that. Of course, in the offseason, the Eagles just bolster their running back room, quite frankly. They get Will Shipley out of UDFA. They pick up A.J. Dillon at a point, and ultimately there wasn't really much room left for Boston Scott to be a contributor on the team anymore. I guess he was just out of the league for the last couple seasons. No team wanted to pick up his services at all, and with him now being a 30-year-old, a bit on the smaller end as well, at 5'6", I don't know if there was a legitimate role lined up for him anywhere. And so with that in mind, he called it a career at that point. He would be far from the only one in this stretch of time, though. But all the same, man, you hope that there was nothing else like underlying or extremely negative that might have led to this decision. And, you know, he bowed out on his own power. Even if we don't know that right now, you hope that that is the context here. The Panthers traded Andy Dalton to the Eagles in exchange for a 2027 7th rounder. As long as you're getting something, I guess. I don't know how the fuck they managed to get away with that, but I digress. The Colts signed Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. And then we have a couple more retirements, in fact. To start, it would be Logan Wilson who would decide to call it a career as well. And I don't know. Just thinking it over and just saying that again now. What is up with that? I mean, Now, again, it could be for an entirely different reason. It could be underlying because, as far as we know, for the most part, Logan Wilson was playing in each of these last few games in the second half of the season after he was let go and then picked up by Dallas in 2025. My thing is, I don't know, because again, as I'd already went through his numbers, there was a bit of a drop-off when he joined the Cowboys. I don't know if it had to deal with him playing through anything or not. There legitimately isn't any kind of information on that, and I don't think there was context given as to why he decided to call it a career. I'm hoping that nothing happened to him on any sort of level like that, but it was just a bit sudden to me. It really came out of nowhere. Even if this wasn't the most promising output for Logan Wilson, I thought that at the very least, he would probably be a player that could stick around and be a serviceable piece for a few good years. So that was just incredibly shocking to me personally. But if I'm looking at this directly at the Cowboys, first it was Leighton Vander Esch, I should say. Jeez. Leighton Vander Esch retiring from the NFL with a neck injury, and he was on your roster just a few years ago. Now you lose another player at the same position to retirement also. And we wonder why they can't get a hold on linebackers. I genuinely do not understand what is going on in that system with their linebackers. But I ain't gonna lie, maybe it's just the players. Maybe it's out of their hands with injuries that we may not fully know about. But it gets to a point where something's gotta give, bro. Something's gotta. Why is this something that's a recurring theme? I'm like seriously. What is happening? Then you would have a different one. That man, hey, bro. Oh, it's tough because it's been such a long time since I've talked about him specifically. And yes, with Dallas, he was in quite the weird spot for a player of his sort, especially at that stage of his career. I just didn't understand the Cowboys picking him up for that 3-game stretch. But since then, he has been out of the league completely. Now, this was something that could have been thought about and considered for quite some time. And after a point, you go through 4 years, 3, I suppose, of entertaining the idea and the possibility of it happening on top of doing whatever else it is you were already doing outside of the sport. And it starts to creep into your mind that this is what life after football and without it even looks like at this point already. In some cases, it will get the better of you, especially if you're dealing with different conditions and mental health issues on top of that, and not having the resources provided to you to care for anything of that sort. But in some cases, you're going to be comfortable with that idea moving forward. And ultimately, the decision at that point, even if you don't come out with anything publicly, it's already been made. it would be detailed that T.Y. Hilton would also retire from the NFL officially after 11 seasons. That T.Y. Hilton. Jeez. All of these legendary players. Legendary for his time. I tell you, dude. If you were not there for T.Y. Hilton's career, man, you missed out on a pretty good wide receiver. A pretty good one. I mean, especially from the stretch from 2013 to 16 in terms of yardage, and also 2014 to 2017 as a player. We're talking legit prime of his career, smooth route running style T.Y. Hilton. There were very few receivers, aside from some of the obvious tier 1 level guys in 2010's football, that could go out there and say they were on the same playing field as a T.Y. Hilton. Just an amazing player, every stretch of the word. Had 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons, including a career-high 1,448 on 91 receptions with 6 scores in 2016. And also had 4 straight Pro Bowls from 2014 to 2017. I'm telling you, to have T.Y. Hilton doing what he was doing with a Colts team where, you obviously had the entire situation with Andrew Luck just go completely left, somewhat on part of the fan base when he was addressing these injuries, just turning against them completely. That made for a pretty weird ending overall to that era of Colts football, and made the next few years for him there a little... yeah. But, again, at the peak of his powers, he's doing that in a league where you have receiver talent just completely overflowing the landscape. It was a wild time. And he still stuck out. Not even having to pull off the flashiest things in the world, but proving more than capable to beat the competition off release, to run the smartest routes imaginable and use that football IQ to his strength and to his advantage. And he was a master at that shit. I'm telling you. It's insane, man. He is now 36 years old and will be 37 on November 14th. And to think he pulled all this off as a 5'10 guy. Exceptional. I can't... I don't want to play the speculation game. I don't want to. T.Y. Hilton meant too much to that Colts organization. And I'm just going to leave it at that. He meant way too much to them. And as much turmoil as they've been under, I do also have to look back at a different Colts-related situation as well. That just kind of teed me off a little bit. Or gave me a cue as to making sure that happened. But I'll get to that point eventually. With all the turmoil going on there, and with some of, I guess, maybe it's an overall desynchronization between, I guess, other members of the team and the front office themselves, especially with Chris Ballard at the helm, dude, this would be the way to unify a team around something and be genuine in doing so. Because, again, he gave you way too much as a player and as an overall person on this team to do anything different. Truly. The Browns signed A.J. Epenesa to a one-year deal worth up to $5 million. The Vikings re-signed Carson Wentz. You know, like, yes, I don't know. The Vikings are in a weird spot right now. Because Kyler Murray could be your main man moving forward. And J.J. McCarthy was probably going to take less of the mantle this season overall. At the very least, it does give you some help just in case Kyler Murray goes down. And places you with someone else who does know the system, even if he's primarily a backup, and can probably go out there and get you some smart win or spot wins, I should say, in most any other situation. That's what Carson Wentz can provide for Minnesota at this stage of his career. And I suppose they believe they need something like that. Because, man, I mean, you would much rather have that happen for them than take another chance on Max Brosmer, the UDFA, from Minnesota again. It was obviously atrocious last year. And so this is another step in getting yourself a solidified backup and somebody to hopefully hold down the fort long enough. Even if there are injury problems with him as well, clearly. Just man, oh man. Alright, the Patriots signed Kindle Vildor to a one-year deal, and the Eagles would also sign Dameon Pierce to a one-year deal. It was like, That was interesting to me. I do think I like that move a lot for them. A lot. Like, wow. I'm still kind of stunned that they were able to pull something like that off. And it's crazy too. I guess maybe he might have been a little injured himself, but I also thought even last year, even if he was like, he might have been hurt, if he was available, he definitely would have allowed them to at least solve some of those issues in the ground game with his style of running. And with the Eagles, man, it just makes that running back room even deeper. You know, if you have Pierce's ability to do that, you might not need to worry so much about relying single-handedly on Saquon Barkley as a running back. It's going to take the burden off of him a little bit. And, you know, as you get deeper and deeper into the season, he's got more and more potential, not even to replicate, but to perform in a similar way to that of which he did in the 2025 playoffs en route to their Super Bowl win last year. So that's something to take into account from their perspective. Christian Wilkins, per Adam Schefter, essentially there were multiple reports from him because one mentioned that there were far greater context and some deeper things that Schefter found out in regards to this entire thing involving Christian Wilkins. And I'm like, geez. Okay, that's very, very telling. So it's like, all right, well, Christian Wilkins, if he is trying to fight this, man, he is going to have to hurry up the process of figuring it out. That is genuinely the only way. Now, yes, there is an injury that Christian Wilkins is still dealing with. He's near 30 years old, and the Raiders want to have him play. They want him to be out there and have an impact on the game. It's just like, man. I mean, hey. You know, with the kind of stuff that they were trying to say about him at the time, jeez. My goodness. You just hope that everything is good, but of course that is not going to be a guarantee at all. I tell you, bro. Like, it was just crazy to see that, honestly. I guess we'll have more clarity on it, and that's ultimately important to me, because it's like, okay, yeah, there are some updates here, but you know, do we have true evidence right now, or are different things just leading us in different directions? Maybe, like that's something that could be considered as well. So it's stuff to review for sure. But dude, I mean, hey, bro. You have to have all that in front of you. You can't be watching, you know, all this stuff that they were saying about Christian Wilkins was insane, bro. And I couldn't even imagine how difficult it might have been for him to navigate through something like that. They would just nonstop troll this man, and it was wild. Absolutely wild. He did what with the who and the where? Tough. But he is still a member in writing. They just actually need him to show up. That's the truth. The Jaguars signed Seahawks wide receiver Jake Bobo to an offer sheet, and the Hawks matched it, which would help them retain him on a 2-year, $5.5 million deal. And he signed it yesterday. It is not the numbers that are going to tell his full story here. Like, if you look at them, yes, he's had some immaculate red zone catches and some immaculate contested ball catches. He's a great perimeter blocker. When you look at how games across the season went and how they would line up in terms of the run game, it would be Bobo traditionally on either end, or maybe sometimes as the secondary wide receiver on a given side. He'd handle the assignment of man blocking, essentially, going directly at other matchups and sealing off those edge lanes to give the rushers room to do what they did best out in space and even sometimes through contact. And to have a person who can work all those different angles and, you know, be that physical without really complaining all that much. Like, that's, you know, Bobo's not a person that you hear from a lot, but he didn't really complain about the role. He eased into it. And, you know, that effort helped the Seahawks truly reach that next level. So, even with him not necessarily getting as much reps as a wide receiver, man, what he does in the ground game for the Seahawks is pretty important. There was a restructuring plan for Trent Williams, rather. Apparently, the 49ers put off a $10 million, not qualifier. Damn, I forget the language. But they staved that off. Or I think it was for $10 million. They staved that off. They mentioned that they were still hoping in a contract could be worked out with them, but their own uncertainties had to play a factor into that. And again, I still think they're in a situation where, regardless of what happens with Trent Williams, you want to try to draft one here. I would think so. The Falcons traded a 2026 4th rounder and 6th rounder to the Eagles in exchange for a 2026 4th rounder, 6th rounder, and also Sidney Brown. The Eagles would sign Marcus Epps and J.T. to 1-year contracts, and the Chiefs would sign Travis Kelce to a 3-year, $54.7 million contract extension. At the end of the day, I think that is a bit of a loyalty deal. Truly. Now, when I saw it was a lie. It was a lie. I won't lie to you. The man is literally. Oh my goodness. You don't want to throw that argument in there, but at the same time, the man is going on 37 in October on the 5th, and he's coming off of a season that might have been regarded as a little bit of a down year, a little bit of a decline year, and one of a potential retirement following it. You know, it's been a bit of a rougher sail for him over the past couple years. And with that in mind, you know, one can see why the Chiefs did not have as much success last season if you don't have that kind of continuity coming from a man who had consistently been the guy for them and at an exceptional level, not just in the regular season, but also in the playoffs. And I think that, you know, as we continue to go on as well, that's probably how this is going to continue projecting. Barring anything unforeseen with their wide receivers, he's going to still be the focal point, especially in situations where they're looking to contend potentially for a title. So to have that kind of label on a man getting paid that much money does seem wild and outlandish. But at the same time, if you're Travis Kelce in that situation and you're trying to keep this going for the long run, you want to retire a Chief. You don't want to end up in a situation where you're thinking about going anywhere else to finish off your career at all. No, you want to stay home. The franchise gave him a chance, even when, you know, all of these different issues with maturity and things like that were mentioned as red flags for him coming out of college at Cincinnati. They stuck with him. They gave him a shot, and again, he's a little bit of a late bloomer, but man, for the past decade and some change, he has been regarded as one of the top tight ends in the NFL, bar none. And to be able to do this for a Chiefs organization that before he got there, that before this dynasty started kicking off, it had been over like 50 plus years since the Chiefs last won themselves a Super Bowl. Now they're perennial contenders. That's just something invaluable to that franchise. And any piece of that makes sense, makes logical sense to keep around, like Travis Kelce, should be treated accordingly, I would think. It's not going to truly be understood by many people, and it's not like all the money is guaranteed, but, man, you have to do what you can to keep them around. Truly. The Falcons would sign both Trevor Siemian and Brian Robinson Jr. As a complimentary back, I will say that, honestly, having Brian Robinson Jr. there isn't the worst thing in the world. But a quarterback room with Michael Penix Jr., Tua Tagovailoa, and now Trevor Siemian. Are we serious? Now again, these quarterbacks do not cost a dime. And from that perspective, with the idea that you're still considering and are still set to, release Kirk Cousins, they already have to this point. It's a smart way to get as far removed from that issue as possible. But the talent there is questionable, to say the least. So they'll have to work that out. Meanwhile, there be some news yesterday in regards to one player from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And that would be none other than linebacker Lavonte David. Because yesterday, he'd call it a career. After 14 seasons all with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he would retire at the age of 35. I chalk this up, honestly, and I don't want to use all my ammo here in terms of talking about this. But what I will say this about this right now is that, man, it's pretty much the same way you could frame it for Mike Evans. The same way. This is a man in Lavonte David who accrued over 1,700 tackles in his NFL career. And, he was another player, like Mike Evans, consistently doing damage on a season-to-season basis and being regarded amongst the players as one of the better linebackers and one of the better players in the overall league. Yet you take a look at his output in terms of accolades, and you see just a single Pro Bowl nod, you see a first-team All-Pro, and you see 2 second-team All-Pro appearances. And it doesn't read like he did much of anything. That is far from the truth. And it's a testament to how great he was as a player, and for a while, how underwhelming that Tampa Bay organization truly was. It is great to see that he was also able to get a ring out of the overall experience. And even in his later years, he strung together 3 consecutive 110-plus tackle seasons. And while, you can nitpick at the fact that, in some cases, a lot of the combined tackles do all the work. No. His 1,172 solo tackles led the league from his entry to his retirement. There has not been a single player in the league that you could trust more to stop ball carriers in their path directly in man-on-man situations than him. He could get feigned out on occasion, but more than likely you weren't fooling him at all. Once he got a hold on you, you were going down. Simple as that. You were going the fuck down. And there wasn't a damn thing you could do about it. Man. On top of that, being a field general linebacker of sorts, He also had 14 interceptions and 21 fumble recoveries, along with 33 forced and 42 and a half sacks throughout his career. Just a well-versed player in every sense of the word. And I'd imagine that he'd get some form of recognition in some way, because it would be something that's well-deserved for him and something that he wasn't always going to get an opportunity for, being in an organization that had truly been bottom of the barrel for such a long period of time. I think there were, different, kind of sentiments from his standpoint as well over the last few years that would suggest that, hey, more than likely, in some time, he was probably going to call it a career. But, man, it was still a shock to hear about it as it happened. And, his press conference, although I didn't watch it, there was a moment apparently that I saw where he brought up his late parents in the entire context. And he started tearing up and crying. So it's not like this decision was easy for him at all. It was a pretty emotional one. But I know that in some way, they're going to do right by him. They've got to. Because you want to talk about players giving it their all for an organization. He could have been in a situation where he decided to, go to a different team, especially when the going got tough. No. He stuck it out and played with that organization for all 14 years. So that commands a massive amount of respect from pretty much everywhere. It's like there's just no way that can be disrespected. The Cowboys would sign Derion Kendrick. And then for, the annual league meeting that is set to take place next week, there would be a varying amount of rule propositions that would come through about it. And I'll just rattle them off. I won't go as briefly into every single one just yet, but I will say that there are some, when I read through the article on it, because this is a recent piece of information here, when I read through some of them, I can see how they would become proposals. I can see how they should become laws. But in others, especially when it came to the Browns, yeah, there's a problem with that. So all of these different rules and laws of this nature, they come from the NFL.com article. Now just go in order with it. So these first 5 rules proposals are all from the competition committee. The first one is to permit the kicking team to declare an onside kick at any time during the game. I think that is sensible. There's an essence with that. No one, and you continue to harp on this, it's crazy. No one expected Thomas Morstead to come out there in the second half of that Super Bowl between the Colts and the Saints and open it up with an onside kick that was also dialed up on the part of Sean Payton. No one expected that, and they got it done anyways. One of the more, well-renowned moments in Tom, especially in his overall career. It's not something that I'd expect teams to do all the time, but to just have the option when you're trailing, regardless of the situation or how much you're trailing by, if you want to go for an onside kick at any point, you should be able to. I mean, shit. This is something that, and again, you hate to bring this up. How the fuck were they allowing this shit in Madden? I'm playing Madden, and anytime I find myself trailing, you have the option to go for an onside kick at any point in the ball game then. Why the fuck is that not the case in real life? That's a common sense move. So that's something that should probably I would think gets passed. The next one is to eliminate the kicking team's incentive to intentionally kick the ball out of bounds when kicking from the 50-yard line. The integrity of the game. Oh, they can't do that. They're circumventing the rule book when something like this happens. Now, they could have a point with this, but at the same time, how do you dictate that someone is doing this intentionally at the same time? If anything, the language here is a bit weird. How about situations, and again, to the same point, it's like, bruh, people have been circumventing this for so long, but a better way to frame this would be to look at the receiving team and what happens when they, in kickoff situations, try to fake like they're going to return a kick and then field it with a body part out of bounds. Now, it's a long-standing policy that the NFL has had already, but that would be a far better approach to maybe attack something like this from. Not looking at the kickers here. Because how the hell are you going to designate whether or not they have intent to kick the ball out of bounds? They may just have shitty accuracy. They may not have enough power on a kick genuinely to get it in the direction in which they want. So it's going to be hard to just assume that, hey, they are actively trying to make this intentional. You can't guarantee that. You have no way of recognizing this as we speak. The third one is to modify the kickoff alignment requirements for the receiving team players in the setup zone. The fourth one is to allow league personnel to consult with on-field officials when considering disqualifications for both flagrant football acts and non-football acts without being called on the field. That one could be a little interesting. I think. I guess, people have to have eyes on it. They have to make sure that they're watching pretty much every single thing unfold. They can't miss a step if they do decide to pass that rule. Because the second you overlook something, then there are going to be a wave of other situations that echo that same kind of sentiment. Or look to have you avoid all of your own criteria here and violate that in order to uphold another person's condition in this case. It just makes for a very slippery slope. And then the fifth one here is for 1 year only to allow the NFL officiating department to correct clear and obvious misses made by on-field officials that impact the game in the event that there is a work stoppage involving the game officials represented by the NFL Referees Association. Now, there have been discussions when it comes to new NFL contracts for referees and a potential work stoppage there for them to have replacement refs enter in the event that they are going on strike. However, mate, you're already conceding that you cannot come to a conclusion about this before the season starts. You're just already conceding, and even that was one of the highlighting points on Schefter's original post about this, with this specific rule being outlined. You're already conceding that you're just not going to have your traditional crew or crews of refs this upcoming season, and you're conceding that you've lost the battle, that you don't have a direction in which you're headed to a resolution for this at all. And it's just over like that. I mean, that's a little interesting to me. Next, there are the bylaw proposals, and there are 3 of them. The first one amends Article 17, Section 17.1 of the Constitution and bylaws to permit the league office to adjust the procedures and related dates and deadlines for the final roster reduction to accommodate an international game scheduled in the first week of the regular season. And I think that's fair. Yes, unexpected things can happen to players all the time, even in the midst of making the transition from the preseason to the regular season. But by the time you get set up for these international games, especially with the kinds of travel that it is going to take for so many players, and not only them, also fans to make it to these games, some of their own families to make it out to these games. Y'all understand how long it is to get from any place in the U.S. to a country like Australia. And I think when you have that proposal for that game now being played internationally for the first time, I think that is something that just sparked up this kind of conversation. Because that is a long, and I mean a long-ass plane ride. You need to make sure that you have everything in place far before you even make this trip. So that's reasonable to me. The second one amends Article 17, Section 18.1 of the Constitution and bylaws to establish the Saturday and Sunday of Labor Day weekend as business days to provide clubs with personnel notices during the first weekend after the roster reduction. So that essentially just plays off of the last one. There's not much more for me to add there, but again, it makes a lot of sense. Even with it still being a case where it's a holiday, no, you still have a job to do in informing us of exactly what is going on in terms of timeliness with our different personnel groupings and what exactly we're supposed to be doing on a day-to-day basis for the first few weeks to follow to tip off our regular season. There has to be knowledge of that at a reasonable time, so that again, it's reasonable. And then the third one is to permit players on the reserve or physically unable to perform list to begin a 21-day practice period after the club's second game of the regular season. I suppose this would happen in the event where you have, star caliber or, key pieces of a team potentially coming off of a previous season-ending injury. And, if their Tom Juan states that they can come back early in a season, they can now have these teams, if this were to happen, take them off of the list far earlier and just make it a possibility for them to, at the very least, get in the reps that they will need to ramp up to game speed and then come out on the field ready to go at a far earlier time in the regular season, instead of having to, drag it all the way down to the last eligible week to be pulled off. And then your 21-day window still doesn't leave you with enough time to truly get up to game speed and truly get into the flow of the regular season at that point. Because if you have to wait that long and you're a team that's trying to contend, you are far too late, especially if that player is truly pivotal to your success. And then for the resolution proposals, there are 2. The first is from Pittsburgh, and it wants to make permanent the change implemented during the 2025 season that permits clubs to have one video or phone call with no more than 5 prospective unrestricted free agents during the 2-day negotiation period, and to permit clubs to make travel arrangements with such players upon agreeing to terms. I get the feeling that they did the same thing with Aaron Rodgers to an extent. And so, if I am right on that, there might be a little bit of irony in this. But generally speaking, yeah. If you are trying to, if you have the intent at least to keep an unrestricted free agent on your team, you don't want to have any potential for any kind of tampering going down. In any case. And, when it comes to trying to spark up a conversation on a phone call or having these players go to these different locations in real time when you are another roster actively looking towards it, it happens. It's a business at the end of the day. You gotta limit it somewhere. You don't want to have every single possible team coming after a specific player that you're looking for from their perspective. And they might have a little bit of a point to that. At the same time, you just got to be a little bit quicker then. If you don't want that to happen, you better make a compelling deal. You better not fuck around with the money, and you better pay them what they're worth. It's as simple as that. But okay. And then the second one is from Cleveland, which is to allow draft selections to be traded up to 5 seasons in the future. All I smell when I saw that this was one of the main takeaways, and now it being a resolution proposal for this league meeting next week, you want to know what I smell? I smell fucking regret. This should not pass. It's not all that different from things that may happen in other leagues. But still, when it comes to your draft capital, you need to be able to manage it responsibly. And while, again, you can't attest to everything that went down, it was you who decided to trade all of that capital away in the first place to get Deshaun Watson. And a lot of those picks between 2022 and 2023 turned out to be stellar picks for other teams. Fair enough. But you made that choice actively and then proceeded to pay him fully guaranteed contract that you still have to deal with to this day. Those were your decisions. Meaning that even in the limits, within those limits that were posed in terms of the initial structure at that time from the league, you fucked yourself up. And now you're the Browns in 2026 seeing just how badly things have gone in that realm. Now you want to try to make it to where, okay, if we have to suffer like that, we don't want to suffer something like that again. Just admit it. This is not a move being made on behalf of other teams around the league. This is Cleveland trying to save their own fucking faces. Because they still can't bear with the fact that they made such a brutal mistake. You have to continue owning that shit. Most other teams can handle themselves responsibly. It is your own fault that you could not conduct yourself in that way to get Deshaun Watson. And you just had to pay him a deal that he couldn't refuse. On top of all of the other shit that was going on with him around that time. You saw it, you heard it, and you still thought that you were that desperate for a quarterback, that you needed one that greatly, that you thought that his talent that he possessed at the time could override all of that. And maybe they had a point, but once it went south, there was no turning back. So you can't try to make that shit happen now. The fuck? The Bengals would sign Joe Flacco on a 1-year deal worth up to $9 million. Okay. The Eagles would sign Elijah Moore and the Saints would sign Zach Wilson to a 1-year deal. Meanwhile, for the Titans, they are still working with their new Nissan Stadium, and per a recent report, as I read from NFL.com, they're trying to get things up and running for this stadium as soon as February of 2027. They say that it's on track for it. The second in the one of the two only closed stadiums, dome-style stadiums, along with, just being completely closed. You have SoFi, and it is also set to be this. So that is certainly going to be an interesting sight for them. I was looking at it. I wanted to see if there was, a real live picture of it, and I couldn't come across anything like that. But I would imagine that those people are doing a great job down there, and they want to ensure that they do this thing right. When you had this news of a stadium and a new construction of one first coming out in 2024, man, it is something that the Titans have been waiting for a while, considering that the lease for Nissan Stadium was going up fairly soon. You were looking for different ways to, counter that. And, hey, what better way to, promote a new era of Titans football than get yourself a new stadium going? They've also paired this up with new logos, as they also are talking about with the accompanying video here and in prior reports as well. So they're trying to take on and forge a new path here. As this quote states from the article, the locker room has metal walls in place now with space for 68 fixed lockers along with showers, a trainer's area, and equipment storage. Builders designed the room with an extra beam to put a column in the middle of that locker room to keep the space open. The result is about 50% more space than the Titans currently have in the stadium that opened in 1999 for a cost much cheaper than the $2.1 billion tab, including $1.2 billion combined in state and local bonds for this stadium. End quote. Well, off the rip, if it's going to cost that much more money out of pocket for these people, you best believe that they're going to be looking for a lot more space to operate with. We're accounting for 50% more of it. That's a lot. And, it's a wonder that different players found ways to survive in an organization like that when you're clumped up next to each other, essentially, on game day. That is some of the most uncomfortable shit. So, hey, space it out a little bit. Give everybody their fair room to do what it is they got to do. And we can roll on that way. That's going to be incredibly important. And a lot of these designs as well, a lot of the accommodations are also looking to make sure that, one, things are more accessible, and two, a structure of this kind that costs this much is also set to be fully intact. I'll read this whole quote here. The players will be able to park underground, take a short walk to the locker room, and then the field itself. The Titans also have an area for players as families and children, bigger than what's available in the current stadium, along with nanny services available during games. What fans will notice are the 44 escalators and 27 elevators, compared to only 6 elevators at the current stadium, all designed to get them to their seats faster. We wanted it to look awesome, Niall said of the stadium. We wanted Nashville to be proud of it, but we really kind of integrated the fan experience and the player experience every step of the journey. Cables about 3 inches in diameter, weighing about 40 pounds per foot, have been laid in a grid across the floor of the stadium and are being strung through ports in the compression ring along the top. The plan is to start raising the cables into place starting in May with all translucent roof panels installed in October at the latest. End quote. So let's break it down a little bit. For the first portion, even with this coming down to profit, that's a wholesome component. You know how many instances, and I can't even speak to it myself, so many players are spending time away from their families just to go down and play these games. And you now have yourself a situation where a lot, especially those who do live in the Tennessee area, maybe have relocated there specifically to play football, they can now have their families in much closer proximity and know that they're going to be taken care of. That means something. And that does wonders for the mind, even if your focus is going to be on playing football. That takes a lot of stress off of a player's shoulders. So that means a lot. 71 total escalators and elevators. That's just the idea of getting into the modern day experience at an NFL stadium. And also with the fact that Nashville is the outright entertainment capital of Tennessee. They're building this, I think, near a mall, near a complex, so you're obviously going to have a lot of traffic around there. And you need to be able to make sure that most every fan who attends, it's not going to be perfect. I understand that. But you want to maximize those opportunities and maximize the quality of life experience that these people will have coming to these games. So you don't want to continue having all these outwardly long lines of people just waiting to, board different escalators or different elevators, especially when there's such a low amount of it in regards to the ratio of fans that would be trying to load up on every one. So that's another component of that. And then when it comes to the cables being strung around the compression ring, they want to hold off on that and wait until we get into the hotter months of the year to fully set them up. Because at that point, while I'm sure that there have been attempts to make it happen, even with Tennessee being a southern state, the mix of snow and rain over the past few months has hit everybody all over the country. So you had to find a way to conserve that. It is sensitive material. Once they get this fully set up, it's going to make the entire board of technology in that stadium run. That is what's going to control the lights, what's going to control the different graphics on the scoreboards, and what's going to control the power for those scoreboards in the first place. What's going to control different, amenities and, materials for these accommodations around the stadium. It'll all run through that. So you have to protect that material as best as you can. All in all, it seems like they are on the right track for it. And the finished product, with what was displayed on initial renderings, it should look beautiful. But above all else, it is meant to just make life a little easier on the people that play in the game and attend the game, for a beneficial experience all around. And for a couple quick updates here, Minnesota submitted a bid recently to host the 2028 NFL Draft. the regular season opener will be on a Wednesday, as was already mentioned. The Seahawks will be hosting it at home. And for the September 11th game, the Friday night overseas game in Australia, it'll be the 49ers and the Rams officially on the Melbourne Cricket Ground in Melbourne, Australia. Y'all be an interesting start to the season, to say the least, man. But that'll do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.